Hey guys, what's growing? It's Heather at Bush Poppy Farm. Today we are talking sweet potatoes and regular potatoes. So it is mid-February. For me, in my zone 9, this is the time for me to start getting both my sweet potatoes and my regular potatoes, and I'll explain that in a minute, going. Not planted, but going. So, first things first, I want to thank all of you for joining me today. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather. I'm a flower farmer in Northern California, Zone 9B, and I also grow lots and lots of veggies. We're getting ready to have chickens, so, you know, mini homestead, flower farm, and lots of gardening content on this channel. So, sweet potatoes. That's what we're going to talk about first. Sweet potatoes are actually not potatoes at all. They look like potatoes, but they are not potatoes. They are actually members of the morning glory family, which is interesting because there's a lot of morning glory species that are toxic. So I always found it interesting that they are morning glory members. These are a tropical plant. They do not will not tolerate frost or cold temperatures, especially cold soil. So they require some specific environmental conditions to really do well. They love humidity. They don't even mind torrential rainstorms. So for us in arid regions of the West, growing sweet potatoes can be a little bit challenging. You have to actually create the environment for them to do well. And you don't grow sweet potatoes like regular potatoes. You don't plant this. What you do is you grow them from what's called slips. Now slips are if you've ever let a potato or even a sweet potato sprout by accident and you see that green shoot that comes up, that is a slip. And so in order to produce slips, it can take 60 to 90 days. So to figure out when you need to plant your sweet potatoes, take your last frost date, your average last frost date, add a month, because the really safest time to plant sweet potatoes is 3 to 4 weeks after your last frost date to make sure that you don't encounter frost. Because what will happen is all the greenery up top will get frosted and die. The root underneath might still survive depending on how, established it was, but it will be dramatically stunted and it may not recover. So it's best to wait till all danger of frost is past. Now, on the other end of the season, if you have a totally established plant, but it needs a little bit more time to size up those tubers, and you're going into, say, October or your frost period, the tops of the plant can actually, if they get frosted and die back, that's okay once they're firmly established and have really produced some tubers, because the tubers are protected under the ground. So the top of the plant will die, but you're getting close to harvest anyway, and the top of the plant would have died anyway, so that would be okay. But when they're just starting out, they don't even really have a root system, you definitely don't want to put them in the frost. So get your last frost date, add a month to that because that will be your plant out date, and then subtract 60 to 90 days. That is when you need to start growing slips. Now slips, you can buy slips from different purveyors. Depends on where you live though. California, it's illegal to ship slips from out of state. So, you'll know pretty quickly if you can or cannot purchase them. There are a couple ways to start slips. What you'll see a lot online is people will say, take your sweet potato, put toothpicks in it and suspend it in water in a jar, and then the slips will form, which I have done before, and I did get a few slips, but I gotta tell you, took a lot longer than this method I'm going to show you, and you have to change that water every 2 to 3 days or it starts to get funky, get a lot of bacteria growth, and then it rots the potato and then you don't end up with slips. So this method is just a simple soil method, way more advantageous for producing slips for you. So all you need is a tray with potting soil, and your sweet potatoes. A word about sweet potatoes. These guys are actually from a local farm, but you can get them from the grocery store if you want. Or you can purchase sweet potato seeds from online purveyors as well. I have two different varieties here. I don't even remember the names. This one is a purple skinned, more white fleshy variety, kind of like Japanese sweet potato, and this is more of your average orange skin, orange flesh variety. Both were very yummy. So I only have two, right? You're thinking, well, how are you going to get a whole, huge harvest out of two? Each of these could potentially produce dozens of slips for me, which would mean dozens of plants, which would mean even more potatoes, sweet potatoes. So you don't have to go crazy. I'm going to start with just these two. So let me show you what the setup looks like and how we're going to do this. So you can see I just have a basic garden tray here with bagged potting soil in it. Doesn't need to be anything special. All we're going to be doing here is putting in the potatoes so they can root and form slips for us. So you're going to take your sweet potatoes, you are going to nestle them in. Don't cover them all the way, cover them like halfway. And this potting mix I have pre-moistened. It is not wet, but it is not dry. It is moist. So it won't drip if you squeeze it, but it is definitely not dry. Now, because they love humidity and they love heat, these guys don't like to be cold. We're out here in the greenhouse, and I don't let it get below 50 degrees out here. And that's the soil temperature that you're going to need your outside soil to be in before you plant them, 50 degrees. So I'm going to leave them on this seedling heat mat. That will keep this soil nice and warm. It'll keep it probably around 65 to 70 degrees. Then what we're going to do is put this humidity dome over them. So it's got holes in the top because you want airflow. You don't want it to be airtight in there or things will start to mold. But you want to make sure you keep this soil moist, slightly damp, and keep an eye on these guys. Keep them in the bright light here on the heat. You can put these in a windowsill if you want. They just need a lot of sun. It's just like growing any plant, right? Sun, moisture, and these guys love humidity. So we keep these guys here, and in 60 to 90 days, we should have slips that we can then cut off and plant in the ground. So we'll come back for a part 2 of this video at that time. So moving on to potatoes, eating potatoes. So potatoes, unlike sweet potatoes, are actually nightshades. The nightshade family includes potatoes, eggplant, tomatoes, peppers, and a couple other things. You could get seed potatoes from a lot of places online. You can also sometimes find them at your local garden center, which is where I get mine, because these two varieties, Russet Norcota and Red Johnny, are very good for growing in my zone, my area, where we have, dry, hot summers and high temperatures. So you might want to check out, maybe do a search on what's the best potato varieties to grow in wherever you live is, because you might be surprised there'll be varieties that you wouldn't think of. So for the best success, that's a good idea. Now, what you need to do with potatoes, actually this is not a must, but it's what I like to do. Potatoes, they also, the foliage is also frost sensitive, and it will die back in freezing temperatures. So you do want to wait until about 2 weeks before your last frost before planting them out. And if your soil is soaking wet, then you kind of probably want to wait a while for it to dry out in order to plant, because these guys will rot in the ground. You'll just have a mushy mess and you won't get actual potatoes. So, but what I'm going to do is start the process, which it actually has already started on some of these because I've had these in this bag for a while. So seed potatoes, you'll notice, is they're a little bit softer, not mushy, but just not super firm like they would be if you were going to eat them. When they call them seed potatoes, they're still the potatoes that you get out of the ground and you could eat. These were just saved over from the end of the potato season so that they could become seed for the New Year's crops. So these are the Norcota russets, and I'll show you what we're going to do. This is a process called chitting, C-H-I-T-T-I-N-G. Chitting is, like I said, not strictly necessary. You can just plant a potato in the ground and it will form sprouts and send them up. But if you chit them, which means letting them sprout like this, you actually will get potatoes an earlier crop, and they'll be bigger and just a more substantial plant. So that's why a lot of people like to chit them. Now, your seed potatoes, it's best to put something in the ground that's about the size of an egg, which is kind of what all of these are. And you can see a lot of them are pre-sprouted already. They have chitted out, just sitting in the bag. But then a few of them are a little bit bigger than you want them to be. This one's kind of pushing it, but I think I'll save this one and still plant it out. If your potato, your seed potato, ends up being a bit bigger than an egg, you can cut it in half. Let's say this is a little bit bigger. I might cut it in half, and those would be 2 parts that I could plant. Some people like to, when they cut them, let them heal over, callus over first for a day or 2 before they plant them out, to avoid any rotting or anything like that. I have never found that to be an issue, so usually I just chop. If I'm going to cut them in half, I'll cut them in half and stick them right in the ground. But I want to show you how to chit your potatoes, so that you can get the sprouts going and you can have a more substantial thing to put in the ground, give you a faster, sooner harvest. So some people like to use egg crates, which is actually a really good idea. You can pretty much use anything that will allow the potato to kind of stay still, because a potato actually has 2 ends on it. And you'll notice this when you start looking at them. You've got this flowering end, which is the end that's going to send up all the shoots, and then this is kind of the root end. It's actually going to send roots out into the soil that will help it anchor, and then all the stuff that comes off of the rest of it will help you produce tubers. So I have a tray here. This I normally plant in, but it's similar to an egg carton. So what you would do is, and I'm going to see if I can get one of these other guys. All right, so what I would do here, and I can tell right here, this is the top, because I've got a bunch of eyes up here, and I don't have any eyes down here. This is more of like a rooting tip. So what you're going to do is you're just going to place them in your tray or your egg carton upright. You don't need soil. This is not, you're not planting them. You are helping them start putting on these shoots. So you just put them in upright in the tray, whatever you're using, so that they don't roll around a lot, because you want that upright end to stay upright. And then you put them in a warm place in sun. So you might have heard, and this is true, that one of the reasons we hill up potatoes as they're growing is that we don't want light to get to the tubers as they're maturing, because if they get a lot of sunlight, they'll turn green, and green is that green color is produced by a toxin. You don't want to eat that. So that's why we hill them up, to keep them out of the sun. However, when you're chitting, you want that sun, because what you're going for is the sprouts to help you. That's the plant part, right? The leaves. So I'm going to set these up. I don't know if this tray is going to work, because it's actually pretty big. So I think I'm going to try to find a smaller tray, because these potatoes are actually perfect size for seeding. They're, like I said, they're about egg size. So I'm going to see if I can find a little bit smaller tray, and then I'll show you what it looks like once I get them all arranged. Okay, so here's the potatoes. I actually am just using little 6-packs to hold them up, and they fit perfectly. So these guys do not need soil, they do not need water, unlike the sweet potatoes. So it's a different slightly different system. However, they are going to sit on this seedling heat mat for a little bit of heat. It'll never get below 50 degrees in here in the greenhouse, and they will be in light because we're in the greenhouse. So in about a week, because normally I would say give this potentially 3 or more weeks for you to chit all of your potatoes, but I think since these guys have already started, I'm only going to need about a week to let them go, and I'll have enough sprouts on them that I can plant them out. Now, in my area, the supposed last frost date is February 15th, which is today. However, for the last several years, or at least since we've been living here, and we moved to this house in 2017, our last frost has been in mid to late March. So I am going to wait on planting these guys out until the end of this month if I can. Also, I need to let the soil dry out because we've had so much rain. It is too saturated out there. I could plant them now, but they would probably just rot instead of grow. So I'm going to be chitting these out when they're a little bit more established. I'm going to put them in the ground, and that will be a new video. We could talk about how to plant them. I'm going to plant these in the no-dig style, so I'm not digging a big trench. My beds out front are no-dig beds, and there is a way to grow potatoes that way. You wouldn't think so, but there is. So we'll talk about that in the next video when we do our planting out. So all I need to do at this point is keep an eye on these guys. Make sure that the soil in the sweet potato tray stays moist enough to keep it humid in there. Keep an eye on those. It's probably going to take 4 to 6 weeks before they send up slips. Usually the next step is that you would cut the slips off of the potato, and you can leave the potato because it might continue to produce slips for you. And then a lot of people like to root them more in water. I have found that that's not necessary. I've found that you can plant those slips directly in the ground and keep them moist for about 2 weeks, and then root development will be all set, and then they can work on your regular irrigation, or if you just use rain, however it works for you. But they will need some babying in the beginning to make sure that they can form those roots and make sure they have enough moisture, because remember, these are tropical plants. And in some places, it's not a big deal. Like you guys on the East Coast have, or even in the Midwest, have plenty of water. We do not. So our rains will probably end like they usually do, the end of March. Sometimes we can get something into April, but generally it's the end of March, and we don't get rain again until November. So we have to rely on what's already in the soil and then irrigation. So if you have any questions about what we've covered so far in this potato series, let me know in the comments below. We will come back to revisit what these guys look like, and then when they're ready to go in the ground, we'll do a video about that. And then at the end of the season, we'll talk about harvesting. So how can you tell when it's time to harvest your potatoes? How do you tell when it's time to harvest your sweet potatoes? And how do you go about doing that, especially potatoes in a no-dig bed? And the same for sweet potatoes. So stay tuned for those. And in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful time in your garden. I will see you in the next video. Bye.